So we are. Whoops. Yo, yo, yo. Yo, 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 yo. Yo, 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 yo. Yo. So, today is day 26 of Learning Blender with me. I feel like this is just becoming a. Yeah, it's just one of those things. One of those things, And so, yep, we're at day 26. Trying to see what life is about. Pew, 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 pew. I'll go through, do the regular stuff. Tweet, retweet, share, go on Facebook. Let the peoples know. My freaking computer is going crazy right now. It's like, what the heck? What in the world? So, boom. Share that bad boy. Say, holla with the guala. And so, go through. Udemy. Seven days left. Boom. So I'm like cranking away at this. I mean, it's going. Probably day 50. If I make it to day 50, this will be done, hands down. But we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. And it's like, I think I only get like a handful of people actually watching this in real time, and so I'm pretty sure this is just going to be a time capsule for me on many occasions. It's like it's May 7th, and yeah, May 7th. Yeah, I'm almost done with this. Yeah, I should be done with this by the end of the week. So we'll see. So here we go.
Hello everybody and welcome back. In this lecture we're going to have a look at proxies, which is a way when you've linked a file that we're able to edit some of the properties of the original data block that we've moved across. Now there are some rules to this. You can only have one copy of linked data in any one blend file. If you try and bring it in again, it just won't allow you to bring it in again. It will just re-reference the original link. That can be incredibly useful in animation. It can allow you to bring complex rigs in as a proxy, but with some of the more complex bones hidden from the animator, which is incredibly useful if you don't want them pulling on levers they shouldn't be pulling on. It will be superseded by library overrides, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. Changes are restricted unless you start making some data blocks local, and we'll talk about making things local after we've talked about library overrides. So let's hop on over into Blender and start talking and showing you guys about proxies.
Okay, so
Hey everybody, welcome back over into Blender. So let's start by talking about making something a proxy. So we've got our ball in our scene here. If we go up to the object menu and go down to relations, we have a series of options that we can use, and make proxy is the top one here. Let's go ahead and click that and make proxy. Now notice here that it's moved its position in the world as well. If you were zoomed in, you might even think it had disappeared. And let's have a look over in the outliner. So we've got a cube to link proxy. That's interesting, isn't it? And we've lost the modifier that was on it as well. So that's useful to realise that we've lost that. And look, we've still got our original one there as well. But now, when we try and move it, oh, it's snapped back down here. Interesting quirk there. That might be a bug. But here we go. Our cube to link, it's now still there, and we can hide it away. Our cube to link proxy. Now this is interesting. We can start to move this to other locations. We can rotate it, and we can also scale it. It's a shame that it's lost its modifiers that we had on there. Now there's no reason why we can't go ahead and re-add a modifier. That's one thing we can do. If we wanted the specific modifier, let's see if we can link that data block. File, link. We're currently in the object properties by the looks of it. Is there such a thing as modifiers? Doesn't seem to be. So modifiers, those data, don't come across. So how do we inherit what the other one had? Well, again, linking things together. Whilst we're on the theme of linking, we can select our cube here, shift and select our sphere, control and L, we can make links. So here we can make links to modifiers, and there we go, we can inherit that modifier. We can also get to that under the object menu and make links, and here we've got other things that we can pull in as well. But now that it is a proxy, we can do other things like use an array modifier on it if we wanted to. There's many options that this now opens up for us, and the main one of course is we can put it somewhere in our scene. Now I don't want the cube to link remaining there, so I'm going to hide that out of the way for the moment. Now remember, of course, you can still duplicate these things, and remember, a duplicate will inherit all of the properties of the thing that has been duplicated. So for instance, if we went down to our material, we can't give these new balls new material. So you can see with this, if you were importing all of your building pieces, you'd very quickly be able to build up your building knowing that any of the changes you make to the pieces will automatically be reflected in all of the proxies that you've added to your scene. But one thing to bear in mind is this naming structure can get very, very convoluted quickly if you're not careful, especially if you have many, many pieces. At that point, I would still name them appropriately, like a wall piece, and perhaps the part of the building it's in can be handled by an individual collection, rather than trying to name things very, very specifically. Now, if you really want to give this skill some practice, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and rebuild your little church or building scene that you've got, but this time importing it all into a new blend file as proxies. Pause the video now and give that a go. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Well, let's go ahead. I'm just going to save this crazy scene that I've got here and create a new scene. Okay, so with the new file open, sorry default cube, you've got to go. Now, if you're doing something repeatedly, you may benefit from going to link, for instance, right-clicking and adding it to your quick favorites. Then when you're in the viewport, you can just go queue, select link, and then find what you want. So I'm going to want Archway Bricks 001. I'm just going to import all of the 001s that I need. So the floor, of course, let's place it over there where it is in the scene anyway. And this would be nice because it's going to separate them out so I can see them. The wall, link, and I think a window, and we're done. So window 001. I know if I import this archway, for instance, in any other way, nothing else is combined like the Archway Brick 001 is. Okay, and of course it's brought in the materials as well. Perfect. Okay, so now that these have all been brought in, I will do a tiny bit of organisation after I've converted them or made a proxy of all of these pieces. So let's go ahead, make a proxy. And again, if this is something you're repeating yourself lots with, you may want to create a shortcut. Remember, you can undo shortcuts at any time, but because I'm only doing it 4 times, I'm not going to create one this time round. Relations, make proxy. Oh, I missed that. I always forget. You need to double tap. So make proxy, make proxy. Okay, so it's done some weird things with placement there, but remember, we can move things around. Okay, so I'm going to go and create myself a collection here. So I'm going to do all of the linked files first, because those are the ones I cannot do anything with. So I've got all of those selected. I'm going to move them into a new collection, and I'm going to call this collection linked. Okay, so those are out of the way, and these ones I'm going to press M, make a new collection, and call it building. Awesome. And now it's just a matter of constructing this. But I'm going to hide away my linked to begin with, and then everything else can be put together. So it's just a matter of having a look at what it is, rotating it round 90 degrees, and snapping it into place. Now this, of course, we did color code them deliberately, so rotate Z180. So I would know what was the inside and what was the outside, so that things snap together really well. Now it's entirely up to you how you go ahead and duplicate the pieces of your world. It can be quite challenging to nail down an exact naming structure, but for the building and the purposes here, we're absolutely fine just slapping things together as they are. This will be rotated as well. Let's look from above and move it back in. Okay, we can move our floor piece, and we've got our first little bit done. Now we just need to do the rest, and I can't remember how it was, so I'm going to use Alt and D, and any changes that I make to those components I can always keep and bring back in. I think that's the right way around. Yep. Now there are a couple of other windows. I'm not sure where they were actually, so I'm just going to make this bit up. So let's go here and here, then duplicate again, rotate Z180, and let's move this one here. Alt D. Remember, I'm doing a linked duplicate here more than anything else, which means that if I make any changes, everything gets updated. And then finally, I need a couple more wall pieces. So let's duplicate this here. And we're going to have the intersecting problem that we had before as well on these 4 corners. We've not solved that one yet, but we'll get there in the fullness of time. That's okay. And then we've got this wall piece here. So once again, duplicate and move it to the appropriate locations. And I think that's pretty much a standard copy. Excellent. I think that's pretty much spot on. I can't remember what the other one looked like exactly. I'm just going to give this a floor piece outside as well. And of course, this is no different from the other one. We can now fly around our scene. And if I turn on gravity with the is it tab key to turn on gravity? Yep, there we go. I can still walk around my scene and explore it for what it is. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm not sure if I had the windows on the end instead. Oh, I've managed to jump. Okay, so that's lots of fun, and I've rebuilt it using the proxies. Of course, a quick test here that we could do is go ahead and save our work. That's quite important. I'm going to call this the proxy church, and go in and open up our main file. Excellent, and yes, we can see here that that's not quite how I designed the other one. Anyway, I got the gist of it there. So what else can we do here? What did I want to test? Yes, let's grab one of the wall pieces, grab the face on top, and extrude by Z by 2, just making it a tiny bit bigger for our testing. Save the file, come back over into the proxy church, and boom, they've all been updated. And that's the power of this. If we had a different church design and we moved everything across, boom, straight away, all of those pieces are updated with the new versions. And that's exactly what we want. Now, there are a few other things to tidy up. This will be in a challenge later on, like some extra corner pieces. We just don't have enough to make our building at the moment. But excellent. This is coming along really well. I'm going to literally go back into my church and revert to this change. I can't undo it, unfortunately, but what I can do is delete those top vertices and then just fill in this top face here. And of course, being true to my word, I need to go back and make sure that it's updated here as well. Excellent, and there we go. So this really highlights how proxies themselves can add a bit of complexity, or linking in general can add quite a bit of complexity.
Really
but the benefits of it, when you start getting larger scenes and you've perhaps got a series of other models that you want to bring into a single scene, because you're not always going to make everything from a fresh start every time. That would be a very foolish endeavor. If you can shortcut some of your work so you can get onto your next project quicker, that's a great thing to do. So I'm going to leave this with you now, and I'll see you all in the next lecture. Hello everybody and welcome back. In this lecture we're going to talk about library overrides. And as you can see at the top there, I've made it very clear, this is an experimental feature. It's still in the process of being built. Now, it's the new version, essentially, of proxies, but it comes with a few bugs, some ones where you go and scratch your head, but essentially, think of them as the modern version of proxies. They come with some extra features, which is really useful. And of course, because it's experimental, I'm really just going to go over it briefly at the moment, until it really becomes the way of doing things. Independent overrides to the same linked data. That's useful because you may want to, let's say, change the material on your linked data on one of the particular instances of your object, and on the other one you don't. Well, this will enable you to do such a thing. Adding independent modifiers, that's really useful, being able to subdivide something or not, and not having to worry about whether it was done in the source file. Making a library override of a library override. So this is like nesting. So if you have a scene in which you have a proxy, you cannot create a, I won't say new scene, you cannot create a new blend file linking to that scene blend file that has a proxy in it. That won't work. However, if it has a library override, you can chain together multiple blend files. Obviously, the more you have in this chain, the more potentially unstable your project is. One change could break the lot. A corrupt blend file could end up destroying something. So we need to be careful when you go ahead and make library overrides of library overrides. But enough of talking about it. Let's hop on over to Blender and look at library overrides. Okay, so now we're over in Blender. We're in our proxy church scene at the moment, and I want to demonstrate that essentially it's exactly the same as we were working on before. We've already linked things in, so we could just destroy the building that we've created so far, get rid of all these pieces, and there we go. We've got an empty building collection, but we still have our linked files, so let's bring those back. So linking is the first step, and we've made a proxy. However, what we can do instead is go to the object itself, and then in the object data properties, what we can do, if we go over the chain link icon that we have here, we can make that local by just clicking, and there we go. We've got no linked icon at all, but we've broken that link, and we don't want to do that. We want
remember it's about the bug and have it when I export the video, but if you made a video to see. News about the bug. News about the bug. What bug are we talking about? Bug? A video to see. Does it work? Yeah. Wait, what bug are we talking about? I'm confused. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Want to make sure it's able to be up.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, it just, yeah, if you want to shoot that my way, feel free to. I know, I think that frame video that I made that so long ago. I made it like 5 years ago. And so I'm like trying to, I don't know if I want to revisit it right now. I'm trying to like go through and learn Cinema 4D and all these different things. Doing podcasts and stuff. It's good to be busy, but it's tough to be busy. Tough to stay busy.
Dated. So I'm just going to undo there. But you can see the other option here is to shift click to create a library override. Now, every time that I've tried to do this, it doesn't actually work, unfortunately. It doesn't do anything at all. This is likely to change in the future. And again, the warning at the beginning, this is experimental. Some things don't work as you would expect them to. But just the same as proxy, you can go to Object, Relations, and make a library override. When we do that, we see that we've got the chain link icon again, but this time with an arrow through it. And like the proxies, we can now move things around, which is really, really useful. And that means that we can start doing the same to the other objects here. Let's go in and make a library override. I'm just going to do it to the other couple here. And there we go. We've overridden the library links there. Now, much the same as before, we can then come in, and if you go Alt and D to make a duplicate of that window to use it elsewhere, you may think initially, uh-oh, it looks like if we go ahead and pop it there. Oh, have I just removed the duplicate? Yes, I did. Okay, so we duplicate it, and let's just move it out here. Look, we've broken the link.
Oh, yeah, it's all good,
But it's not made it
I
local
really only understand English, so the fact that you can understand
even though
a little
it's a
bit of what I'm saying
object in our scene with
is,
new object data,
better than me.
if we go to our mesh, we can see that it's still linked data, and the same will be true of the material as well. So we can build things up. Now, I'm not going to challenge you the same as the last lecture, because you're just going to end up building the same thing again, which is just a bit silly. However, this is your library overrides in a nutshell. But one of the final things I want to show to you is that if we go ahead and save this file and go into a new file, but then try and link, let's go into our links, come out of here completely. If we go into our church proxy, or proxy church, and go to our objects, we can see our objects are here. We can bring them into our scene. We can't move them, just as normal. And if we look in the outliner, we can see it's still a linked file, wall001. However, if we now go to Object and go to Relations, we can make a library override again. How useful is that? And then we're back to this stage where we can start moving things around. It's really cool that we're able to nest things like that where possible, but remember, a chain of these things may break Blender. Now, I've just discovered something as well. Uh-oh, Blender crashed there, so let's go ahead, bring back where I was before. And that's not unexpected, of course, because I'm dealing with experimental stuff. It's bound to happen. So where were we? Proxy Church, we went to an object. Doesn't matter which one. Let's go to our Archway Bricks. We can see it's linked. We cannot move it around. So what I was going to show you is that if we go into the object data properties, now you know I was saying shift and click of that doesn't seem to do anything. It doesn't. However, what you can do, didn't realise this is me. I've read the instructions. They don't work. If you click it once, it makes it a library override. If you click it again, then it will make it local. So I'm just going to undo one of those, and there we go. Blender has crashed again. Okay, so I think I will leave it there for the moment. As you can see, it's still just a little bit unstable. Hopefully that will all be sorted out over the coming months and will become much more stable. Okay, so that leaves us with a choice as to whether to use proxies, which is the old way of doing things, or to do the library overrides. I think personally, I'll probably use proxies until I know that library overrides won't crash when I undo. That's something I rely on, the undo key. So yeah, I don't want to risk a project like that. However, if you're just going and testing, try out library overrides. And when you think you've got a stable copy, give us a shout in the discussion so everybody knows that it's now stabilized. And then perhaps I can come back and refresh this video with working versions of library overrides. And I'll see you all in the next lecture.
Do I live in 5H? I have no idea what 5H is. What is 5H? What are you talking about?
Hello everybody and welcome back. At some point when you've linked a file, you may want to make parts or all of it local. So let's talk about some advantages and disadvantages of doing so. The advantage, of course, the big one here, is you'll have more local control. In fact, if you do everything, you've essentially appended rather than linked, in which case it's just like a duplicate, a copy of that data in your file without any links to the original. External files moving, a project can stay together. This is a very important one because if you're dealing with a large project, having everything all in one file, as I'm currently doing in mine, is really, really useful. The problem, of course, is it can balloon your blend file and make it much larger than it necessarily needs to be. However, if you needed to share your project with someone else, actually appending everything into the scene, which is having everything local, then that might be the way to go. And we'll talk about packing into the blend file as well, which is incredibly useful. It means that any textures, you don't need to make sure they're linked to specific places on drives. They can be baked, essentially, into our blend file. Although, caution, you can make your blend file very large, which may take some time to open if you're not careful. Disadvantages, potentially more work involved. So one of the issues, of course, is, as you probably guessed, I've talked to...
Do I live in 5 hours? Do I live in 5 hours? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Oh, you need to make something in After Effects? Well, I will be... Yeah, I probably will only be on live for, you know, I'll probably only be on live for, you know, probably 30, like 20 more minutes. And then I got other projects I have to work on, unfortunately.
It's a lot about how you can bake things in and then you can share, etc. When you have everything local, it means that if you make one change, you may have to repeat that elsewhere. Whereas if you've got something linked in externally, that one change should affect everything where that particular data block has been linked. Any edits you make on the original, as we're saying there, affect all linked data blocks, but not the ones made local. So that goes for materials, it goes for mesh data, and it goes for particle systems as well, and anything that is a linked data block. So when do you localize? This is a great question, and there's not going to be a hard and fast rule, unfortunately. It's going to vary depending on your circumstances. So a basic one here would just simply be when the link is not required anymore. That's quite a common one. Yeah, I want to take this and just make it unique and not worry about that other file over there. When you want to make the asset unique, so that moves on from this, but in this particular file, so it may be that you want to make it completely unique by altering the mesh data. And of course, if you're using that file in other places, what you don't want to do is edit the original and then find that it ends up a slightly wrong style, for instance, or the wrong colors or the wrong materials in all of the other files where it's linked. Of course, if you're just working on small projects, you may find that this never becomes an issue, but it is something to be aware of when you want to make changes irrelevant to other potential projects. So that, again, goes on what I've just been saying. You don't want to change your source file and have it change loads of other projects just for the one that you're working on. Okay, so we have a couple of options when we come to making something local. There are 4 in total. We'll run through each one, and then we'll go play over in Blender. Selected object. So this clones the object data block to the new blend file. Now, this won't allow us to edit the mesh data. It won't allow us to edit the material. So it does bring across, and it's almost like creating a proxy at this point in time. All the other data blocks themselves remain linked to the original file. So this allows changing of anything in the object data block, but it won't allow any changing for the rest of the hierarchy underneath. Option 2. Selected objects and data. So this will clone the object and data block into the new blend file. Now the data block is, in this instance, when we're talking about an object like a cube, that will be the data, so it would be the mesh data. So now we can edit that file. But it does mean that any changes to the mesh data will now be broken. So we no longer have that link going back to the original file. But the materials and other data blocks will be linked to the original object. So it means that if you update materials, then of course they will update in this file that you're working in as well. Option 3. You can probably see how this is going. Selected objects, data, and materials. So this clones the object data and materials data blocks, and that means that allows editing of the object data and materials data blocks and breaks those links, making them local to this file. And that's pretty much almost all of the things you will generally be working on. And finally, option 4. This is basically appending at this point, just with an extra step involved. So there's an option here that's all, and as it sounds, this is pretty much the same as appending the object into the scene. It's now entirely local within your new blend file with no links to the original file. And we will see that as well because an icon will disappear when we do that sort of thing. Let's go ahead and have a look at this now and hop on over into Blender.
Okay.
Hey, welcome back. Okay, so we're about to experience some weird behavior. So I've gone back into my Suzanne linked so we can play with making things local. I'd like to show you some quirks as well as we go. Okay, so to make something local, we basically have to go over to where we've got the chain itself and go ahead and click it. That will remove the links. And it doesn't really matter how many times we go ahead and click this chain. However, the ones that we duplicated earlier on, they don't have the same issue. Notice here we've got our shiny green paint. So I can come in and change this and look. How about that? These are updating and these ones aren't. Which is very confusing because looking at the naming structure, and let's just pull these out here and have a look at the data within. The cube to link proxy was the one that we made first of all. And yes, it looks like here we no longer have, with our cube, the mesh data is no longer linked and the shiny green paint is no longer linked either. However, this one still has it. We're in edit mode. This pair here, this cube to link proxy, does still have it. So we're kind of in this deadlock at the moment. We're trying to work out. I mean, at first glance, you think, oh, okay, Mike's talked about the hierarchy. So if I look at the cube here, or perhaps if I go down to the mesh data, perhaps I can release it there. It just won't work. With these selected, you can go to Object Relations and make local selected objects. It just doesn't like it at all with this first proxy, or proxies that you make. You just cannot make that change to them. They're not designed to work like that. So what you can do instead, I'm going to get rid of that proxy. This is no longer a proxy, so it can lose the proxy suffix on it. If we go back to our original linked data, this cube to link, it's just there hiding behind the other two balls. And if we go ahead, now is the time where we can go and make this local. So it's linked at the moment. If we come in and go Object Relations, we've got a couple of options. Selected objects, much like a proxy, but without all of the caveats a proxy comes along with, like the inability to change some of those settings we were having a problem with. Objects and data, that will mean we're able to edit the mesh, as we've discussed before. Data and materials, now we can adjust the materials. Or we can go for all. Now when you select all, as I've mentioned, that is the same as just appending at this point. So we can come in, press all. Oh, we're not quite there just yet. And I believe that's currently not desired behavior. I think that is a bug. The easiest way at the moment to make the object data local is to go to the Object Data tab and then go ahead and click And there we go. We've now got the cube to link, and we've got 2 instances of that we can see. And when you click on the chain link icon there, we get the cube to link comes back into fashion. We can name it here and call it ball finally. And it's got 2 users. We can see there are 2 users of that particular data in the scene. And then we can come in. We've got our cube here and we've got our material. And we can't free up the material yet. It's an indirect library data block. We cannot change it because it's based upon the mesh data, and the mesh data is linked. So we can go ahead and free that up. And once we've done that, we can come in because of that hierarchy and make local our green paint, swap it out the other shiny green paint, which is red, and so much better. And now everything's all updated. Now, none of these now have any links back to the original. That's one thing to bear in mind and be careful with when you're making anything local. So how about a live example of that when we've been playing with it? Let's go and put that to the test. So let's go ahead and open up our proxy church that we've been working on. Okay, so now we're in our proxy scene. Let's say we want to modify this window that we've got here. Obviously, anything object related we can do. The moment that we make ourselves a proxy, or indeed use the library override, we are in control of the object data, which can be really useful. But one of the underlying issues with changing the scale or even the rotation or position of an object in the scene is it can affect modifiers, it can affect particle systems and physics in ways that you didn't conceive it might have done. So just scaling this up might be brilliant, and then we go and put a particle effect on it and it doesn't behave as you would expect it to. Because when we try to apply our transforms, we can't do it. It's a multi-user object. So sharing mesh data with something else. So we can't just apply it because it would change everything down the chain. That's a safety mechanism to protect yourself. And the reason why you might want to either make something local or make it unique. So at this point we can come in and make this mesh data here unique. The moment we do that, we should be able to apply all of our transforms. Multi-user object. So the Windows 001 Mesh Cube 11 is multi-user. In fact, we didn't have to even have an error come up to see that. It says 2 users here. So we go ahead, click on that, it's now a unique user, and then we can go ahead and apply all of our transforms, which means that this is really this big now. Of course, we could go into edit mode and do that in the first place, but we would have still had to have unlinked the mesh data in order to be able to do that. Now that's an obscene size, and I don't have any control over it, which is something I don't like. I don't know how big that is now because I've applied it. I wasn't particularly paying much attention. That can go. Let's go through the process again. Let's link that across. There we go, we've got our 2 windows here. And of course the other way of doing this is with this window selected again. If I went Shift and D rather than Alt and D, we've effectively made it its own unique object with its own unique mesh data that we can go in and edit straight away. Now remember, that will now be unique to this file, which may be what we want. If we wanted this to be the end of the church, let's say, and we wanted a big window, but we didn't want to keep modelling all of this extra stuff, we could come in and perhaps scale it on the Z-axis by 2. And knowing us, that's probably not quite right, so let's undo that for the moment and scale it on the Z-axis by 4 or 3. There we go, that looks pretty good. And then scale it on the X-axis by 2. Yeah, there we go, that's pretty good. And now we could surround it with stuff if we wanted to. Does the floor piece fit in still, or do we need an extra floor piece if we do that? The floor piece also fits in absolutely fine. That's one of the things you've got to bear in mind if you go ahead and scale things. Now, of course, the bricks are now all the wrong size. That's the downside of just scaling randomly. But you get the idea how we can mock up a building and sort out all this incidental detailing later on if necessary. Okay, awesome. I'm going to leave that information with you so you can play with it and make your building your own. And that's really where I want you to go at the end of this lecture. I want you to think about any extra pieces you need. Are there any special objects, like perhaps this big window here, that you can make do with just scaling one of your existing windows if necessary? Now, I'll be honest, at this point in time, I've not particularly planned mine to be this particular scale at the moment, and I would encourage you to just be experimental at this stage while you're still putting things together. You never know, you might get one of those happy accidents happening, and I really love it when those do. So go ahead, make sure you've fleshed out your parts pieces and anything else you need to do. Have fun and experiment with your building, and I'll see you all in the next lecture. Hello everybody and welcome back. This will be the last of these theory-heavy lectures for the moment, but I do want to, whilst we've been talking about managing our files, talk about managing our actual files themselves. So, a place for everything and everything in its place. And the great understanding here is that there is no one way of setting up your filing system. I've been in a team where the programmers wanted it one way, the artists wanted it another. In the end, we just had to settle for a compromise between the two that made sense. Ultimately, it will come down to whoever is handling the data the most. It makes more sense for the artist to have to say where and how textures and materials are configured than the programmers who eventually just end up using them, because often there's a hierarchy that you need to have in one system that you don't necessarily need in another, and trying to merge the two together, sometimes it's just not possible. So understanding that there's no one way of setting up your filing system and seeing the pros and cons from both ways, perhaps you can find a way of setting up your workflow so it's kind of independent of anybody else. That's great. Watch out for overloaded folders. So I would try to keep folders less than 20 assets. The problem is, if you have too many things in a folder, it becomes impossible to navigate it. And heaven forbid you have rock 20, which means you've got 19 other rocks in your folder. I hope you have a better naming system than that. Or of course the folder is just going to be called rocks at that point. Have a personal style of filing. If you don't like mine as we start going through the course, use yours. There's nothing to say that any particular way is wrong. It goes back to that top point there. There's no one way of doing this. You may find that the project you're working on suits a different type of filing than what I'm doing. Now, we've mentioned team quite a bit here, and in a team you'll often form guidelines from your own needs. So depending on what type of project you're working on, you'll often find that you need to name things in certain ways, or you need to store them in certain ways, and this is especially true when you're starting to work with particular game engines. Some engines love your files being named in a certain way, or your objects named in a certain way, which is a great reason why you shouldn't just leave things named cube.008. I mean, what does that even mean? I bet it's no longer a cube either. I know I've caught some of you out there. So let's take 3 game engines that I have worked with quite a bit. We've got Unity, we've got Unreal, and Godot. Any one of those game engines requires a different way of naming things. With Unreal, for instance, you need to have a UCX file if you want custom collisions, but you need to make sure that the hierarchy is right within your outliner as well. And Godot, that can have suffixes or prefixes that you put on your files, and that means that Godot will automatically do other things. Being able to understand that and use the documentation that comes along with your game engine speeds up workflow no end. So do form some guidelines, write them down so you can remember them, and then you don't need to worry anymore. You can just export things with those guidelines in place, and it should work really well. Where is it is something that happens a lot, especially as a project gets bigger. So you can go the Google approach, as I like calling it. You can have all the files together, makes it difficult to navigate, potentially easy to search. Now, there is an argument here to say if you've named things appropriately, you should be able to find them with a name. However, it gets a bit awkward when you've got Gravel 1, Gravel 2, Gravel 3. You really need to see them. They may be distinctly different, and it does matter which one you pick. Now, all files for a particular asset together. This is another way of storing your file. So if you have, let's say we're working on the church door, we could put all the textures and everything else together for that particular asset. It's a pain to find one file if you do that, because everything is all grouped together. So that really doesn't help with shared textures. But you could always start like this and float up, so grabbing, let's say, a wooden texture that you've got on your door, then you find that you're using that wooden texture as well on a torch or on a seat, or you can just float it up to a higher level. But then again, it does become a bit more difficult to track where things are. So I would actually favour, especially as a beginner, if you're using that wood texture in multiple places and you've got enough hard drive space, most people do these days, then just duplicate it. That also means that if you need to modify that wood texture, that it won't modify everything that it's linked to. You can get yourself in a real pickle if you're not careful where things are linked together, and it'd be easy to lose track, trust me on that one. Okay, so another thing that you can do is store your assets by where they're used in the game. So you could have cemetery or office block or construction site, whatever it happens to be, you can store things logically in where they're used. And that also has the benefit of being able to have a theme amongst your objects, and it's really easy to see if something's not on theme. However, there's a possibility that if you're working with an artist and you're saying you need to make these assets for me, please, they might not know the locations well. So you can sort by categories. So if someone's focused on polishing an area of a game, they're going to be able to work on it. Okay, so let's talk about some external constraints, things that we don't really have much say over. We kind of do, I suppose, in some ways, but ideally we should adhere to these standardizations. It makes it a lot easier to communicate and work in a team. game engines often have their own naming conventions. I've touched on that already. Whether you need to name something with a prefix, a suffix, look at your game engine's documentation and work to that. Now, meshes, rigs, and textures will often have different names depending on where they're going to be used. So in Unreal, for instance, I'm working a lot in Unreal at the moment, a diffuse texture, a albedo texture, the base color, whatever you want to call it, the base color of your mesh will have BC as a suffix on the end, but it will also have a T at the beginning. So naming things like that means that you know that they're going to be applied properly over in Unreal, and it also means that you can filter things properly as well within the game engine when you're setting up materials. And it's not just Unreal that happens with, it's with all external programs. It could be Substance Painter that you're working with, for instance. It doesn't have to be a game engine, but making sure you have things named appropriately so you know what it is you're looking at would be very great. So let's talk about a texture called Bricks. Bricks doesn't mean anything. Now, you could type Bricks normal, or Bricks bump map, or Bricks albedo, or Bricks whatever. Now, the benefit of that is it's quite generic. You know what it is. The downside of that is it's not in any specific format. And again, you'll know what you're working with, so name things appropriately. Okay, so we've talked a lot about external file management, how to organize things, but what about Blender organization itself? Well, we're going to be making a much more complex scene than any we've previously made. It's going to consist of many, many parts. So I would suggest you organize it as you go. And this also goes for your file system as well, not afterwards. It will be a real pain in the backside trying to name everything afterwards or trying to put it into collections afterwards. Please remember to organize it as you go. We're all going to fall foul of this, and I've seen so many models that you look at afterwards and you just know that that's nearly impossible to edit because nothing's named appropriately, so you don't know what it is looking in the outliner. Okay, yes, use descriptive names. Cube 001, etc. is not helpful to anyone, except of course if it is a cube. Then I'll let you get away with calling it a cube. But it is important, it's not helpful for anyone. You'll know what it is now when you're working on it. When you open up your file again, perhaps even the next day, you might not have a clue what cube refers to if you looked at it. You will have to go and have a look at it, click it in the outliner, come back to the 3D view, look around. Oh, it's a door. I better go name it door. And that's why you can see why organising it as you go rather than afterwards is a good idea. So there are some no-nos as well. Never, ever store multiple versions of the same asset in your master folder. Now, we've not talked really about a master folder, but this is your sort of current working directory. If you've got a new iteration of something you're working on and it's to replace the older ones, then don't keep them all in the same place. Push it into an archive folder so it's very clear that that asset is the one that you're using. So one bit of advice here is not to rename that. Put it in your archive folder, name the folder whatever you need to, but the asset itself, don't go ahead and rename it. Renaming it will break any links to Blender files that you're using that asset in. That would be a real shame and a pain in the backside to try and fix. It will also break all the links that you've got in your game engine as well. Also not great. Of course, there is a kind of exception to this, and that is when you're exporting, let's say both Unity and Unreal, they both accept FBXs. So you're probably going to be exporting into a specific directory in order to overwrite a previous version. And there we go. That's it for me on this topic. However, this is a great thing to discuss amongst yourselves as well. This is such a wide scope. I'd love to hear how you guys organize your files as well. The pros and cons of doing it that way. Be open about it. If you know that there's a downside, tell people about it as well as the good things about it. And also, if you've had some fun experiences, share those as well. A good story of working in a team. You can always laugh about it later, can't you? Anyway, that's enough for me on this topic. Please share your thoughts over in the discussions, and I'll see you all in the next lecture.
Well, that is, I didn't really do much modeling today. I feel like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So probably tomorrow will be a different story. But yeah, you know, thanks for chilling and hanging out with me. Learned a little bit of new stuff. A lot of it is just like linking blend files and stuff. All that stuff is just like still kind of over my head. But you know, I think there's always going to be times where you know, like you have to kind of go through these sort of tutorials and understand the basics in order to really give your creativity room to grow. And I mean, it looks like that was one of these days. So eventually, I will get to the point where I'm actually using this. Right now, I'm not sure how really sure how. I mean, I have an idea of how, because I'll be making like rooms and stuff, but uh, you know, it's always difficult when you're trying to like learn something that you can't really see the applications of it yet. Eventually, but I just really can't see it yet. So kind of just stay along the journey and keep creating, and I will try to do the same. And so without that, thanks for hanging out with me, and I will catch you guys later. Deuces.